The first time Vivian Caldwell called me the supply girl. She did it with a smile and a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. We were standing under crystal chandeliers at a hotel fundraiser in Colorado Springs, surrounded by people who could donate more in one night than I made in a year. Grant had one hand at the small of my back, while his mother introduced us to a couple from Denver. "This is my son, Grant," Vivian said. "He'll be taking over more of the family business soon." Then she looked at me. "And this is Erin. She keeps track of boxes for the Army." The woman beside her laughed, assuming Vivian was joking. I waited for Grant to correct her. He knew I was a staff sergeant. He knew I managed equipment, vehicle readiness, supply movements, and soldiers who depended on me when plans fell apart. Grant just squeezed my waist. Not affectionately, just enough to say, "Please don't make this awkward." I smiled. Something like that. I used to think keeping the peace made me mature. By then, I was beginning to understand that sometimes keeping the peace only means the person being insulted is expected to stay quiet. My name is Staff Sergeant Erin Brooks. I was 32, stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, and had spent nearly 11 years in Army logistics. In uniform, nobody cared whether my last name opened doors at a country club. They cared whether I could solve the problem before it became somebody else's emergency. The Caldwells cared about status. Grant's family owned Caldwell Hospitality and Development, with hotels, event centers, and commercial properties across Colorado. Vivian ran the Caldwell Foundation and loved describing herself as deeply committed to those who serve. Every Veterans Day, the foundation posted photographs of her hugging veterans. One Caldwell hotel offered a military discount. At home, she called my career a phase. That contradiction bothered me more than the insults. Vivian loved military service when it appeared behind her at a podium. She just didn't like having an enlisted woman at her dinner table. At Sunday brunch, she asked Brittany about sponsorship deals and Grant about expansion plans, then turned to me and said, "Still doing the Army thing?" At Christmas, she gave me a leather portfolio. Inside was a printed list of jobs she thought were more realistic for a married woman: front desk supervisor, guest services coordinator, executive assistant. Grant leaned toward me. "She's trying to help." That sentence hurt more than the gift. Vivian could be cruel, but Grant had a way of translating her cruelty into something I was supposed to appreciate. For 2 years, I made excuses for him. He hated confrontation. His mother controlled part of his inheritance. The family business was complicated. Then one snowy night on I-25, Grant said almost casually, "Mom thinks it would be easier if you left the Army before I move into the executive role." Easier for who? He kept watching the road. For everybody. I remember the windshield wipers moving back and forth and realizing there was no everybody in that sentence that included me. A few weeks later, Vivian announced the Caldwell Veterans Leadership Gala, the Foundation's largest event of the year. My invitation arrived on heavy cream paper with gold lettering, "Honoring Service, Building Legacy." I almost laughed. 3 days later, I came home early because a training meeting had been canceled. Grant's office printer was running. A page slid into the tray. At the top were the words "Private Marital Settlement." Most of it was legal language, but beside a blank signature line someone had written in red ink, "Veterans Gala, March 14. My stomach tightened. Then I heard Grant's key turn in the front door. I folded the page once, returned it exactly where I found it, and walked into the kitchen before he saw me. That was the moment I stopped wondering whether Vivian wanted me gone. What I didn't understand yet was why they needed an audience to do it. For the next 4 days, I said nothing about the paper from Grant's printer. I went to work, came home, cooked dinner twice, even sat through one of Vivian's Sunday calls while Grant paced the kitchen telling her everything was under control. I hated how normal I could make myself look. Maybe that was something the Army had taught me without meaning to. You learn very quickly that panic is a luxury when other people are waiting for you to make a decision. Then Colorado started burning. A late summer wildfire jumped containment west of Colorado Springs and pushed smoke across half the Front Range. By midnight, civilian roads were closing, National Guard traffic was being rerouted, and one of our scheduled equipment movements was suddenly sitting in the wrong staging area with no clean route south. The generator package needed by a medical support team had missed its convoy. 2 trucks were waiting on drivers who had already been reassigned. Somebody had entered the wrong handoff point into the movement tracker, and 3 sections were arguing over whose mistake it was. That was the kind of problem I understood. At 1:17 in the morning, First Sergeant Lena Morales walked into the operations room, looked at the whiteboard covered in arrows, crossed out times and unit numbers, then looked at me. "Brooks, tell me what you need." "Not can you fix this?" "What do you need?" There is a difference. I told her I needed authority to break the convoy into smaller movements, 2 qualified drivers from maintenance, and permission to use a secondary route through Pueblo before another closure hit. She nodded once. "Do it." For the next 6 hours, I barely sat down. I called dispatchers, rebuilt the movement schedule, shifted fuel stops, confirmed every driver by name, and made one very irritated captain repeat a handoff location because somewhere near Gate 6 was not a location I was willing to bet equipment on. At 3 in the morning, one of my younger soldiers, Specialist Reed, stared at the board and said, "Sergeant, how are you not freaking out right now?" I handed him a coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. "I'm freaking out after breakfast. Right now we work." He laughed, and somehow everybody breathed again. By sunrise, medical generators were moving. The stranded equipment had cleared the closure. Nobody had lost accountability of a single vehicle. I stood outside the logistics building, watching smoke turn the sunrise orange over Pikes Peak, and for maybe 30 seconds I felt like myself again. Then my phone buzzed. "Grant, Mom sent some career options. Please actually look at them this time." Attached was a PDF Vivian had titled Errand Transition Ideas, Front Desk Supervisor, Guest Services Coordinator, Executive Assistant, Hotel Operations Clerk. I stared at that list after spending the night moving military equipment through an active emergency. I wish I could say I laughed. I didn't. It hurt. That was the sick part of living around people who constantly underestimated you. Eventually, even when reality proved them wrong, some small part of you still asked whether they might be right. Morales found me 10 minutes later sitting on the tailgate of a government truck, still holding my phone. She did not ask to see it. "Home?" I nodded. She sat beside me. For a while, we watched soldiers move equipment across the motor pool. Then she said, "You know what your problem is?" I gave her a tired look. "I'm sure you're about to tell me. You've spent too long around people who benefit from you doubting yourself." That landed harder than I expected. I told her about Vivian wanting me out of the Army. Not everything. I still couldn't bring myself to mention the settlement papers. Morales listened without interrupting. Finally, she said, "There's a difference between somebody not understanding your work and somebody needing your work to be small so they can feel bigger." I looked down at my boots. What if they never get it? Then stop making your future dependent on their comprehension. That sentence stayed with me. 2 days later, instead of opening Vivian's career list again, I opened the Army assignment portal. Brigade Logistics NCO position at Joint Base Lewis McChord was accepting applications. More responsibility, more soldiers, bigger operations, the kind of job I would once have talked myself out of before finishing the first paragraph. I submitted my packet before I could change my mind. Then I put in for the promotion board. I studied regulations at the kitchen table after Grant went to bed. I practiced board questions in my car during lunch. Specialist Reed helped me record mock interviews on his phone and nearly choked trying not to laugh when I answered one question like a Pentagon press secretary. At home, Grant barely noticed. One night he found my dress uniform hanging from the closet door and asked, "You're still going to the gala in uniform?" "It's a veterans event," he sighed. "My mom just thinks civilian clothes would look more polished." There it was again. Not I think. My mom thinks. I looked at him and suddenly understood something that should have been obvious years earlier. Grant was not standing between his mother and me. He was standing beside her and asking me to pretend there was space between them. "I'll wear my uniform," I said. His jaw tightened. "Why does everything have to be a fight with you?" I almost answered. Instead, I went back to studying. Because for the first time, I was no longer trying to win that argument. I was trying to build a life where I would not need to have it. 3 weeks before the gala, Morales called me into her office. She was holding her phone face down on the desk, which was strange because Lena Morales never looked mysterious about anything. She studied me for a second. "Brooks, don't make any plans after next month until you hear officially." My heart kicked once. What does that mean? It means exactly what I said. Then, for the first time since I had known her, First Sergeant Morales smiled like she knew something I didn't. I walked out of her office with my pulse racing. That night, Grant received a call from Vivian and stepped onto the patio so I could not hear him. He forgot the kitchen window was open. I caught only one sentence. "Don't worry, Mom. She still doesn't know what's happening at the gala." I stood perfectly still beside the sink. He was wrong. I just didn't know yet that neither did he. The night of the Caldwell Veterans Leadership Gala, I stood in our bedroom buttoning my dress uniform while Grant watched me through the mirror. He had changed suits twice. That should have told me everything. Grant only changed outfits when he was nervous about how something would look to other people. "You're really wearing that?" he asked. I looked at him in the mirror. "My uniform? You know what I mean." "No, Grant, I actually don't." He exhaled through his nose and adjusted his cufflinks. "Mom just wanted tonight to feel elegant." I almost laughed. The Caldwell family had built an entire event around honoring military service, and somehow my actual military uniform was the thing ruining the aesthetic. So I finished pinning my ribbons, checked my nameplate, and said, "Then I guess she'll survive the disappointment." The ballroom at the Caldwell Grand Hotel looked like something designed for a political fundraiser. American flags behind the stage, blue uplighting against white walls, round tables covered in navy linen, retired generals, local business owners, city officials, veterans organizations, and enough donors to make Vivian glow like she had personally invented patriotism. Across the stage, a huge screen displayed the foundation slogan, "Honoring Surface, Building Legacy." I stared at it longer than I meant to. Grant touched my elbow. "Please, just tonight, no attitude." That was almost funny, too. I had not said a word. Vivian met us near the entrance wearing a silver evening gown and the kind of smile she used when photographers were nearby. She kissed Grant on the cheek. Then she looked me up and down. "Well," she said softly, "you certainly committed to the theme." Brittany was standing behind her with her phone already in her hand. "I think she looks intense," Brittany said. "Thank you," I said. She blinked because she had not meant it as a compliment. Dinner started. Speeches followed. A local congressman talked about service. A retired colonel spoke about sacrifice. Vivian stood at the podium and told the room that the Caldwell Foundation believed veterans deserved dignity, opportunity, and respect after every chapter of service. I sat 10 feet away from her and wondered whether some people could hear themselves at all. About 40 minutes later, dessert plates were being cleared when Vivian returned to the microphone. "We have one more family moment tonight." Grant went still beside me. There it was. My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. That surprised me. I had spent weeks imagining this moment. In some versions I cried. In others I screamed. In one particularly satisfying version, I poured Vivian's champagne into a floral centerpiece. None of that happened. Vivian smiled toward our table. "Erin, sweetheart, would you join us?" Every instinct in my body told me not to give her what she wanted. So I stood. I walked to the stage in my uniform, feeling hundreds of eyes follow me. Somewhere behind me I heard Brittany whisper, "Oh my God," in the delighted tone of someone who believed she was about to get good footage. Vivian took my hand for half a second, just long enough to look affectionate from a distance. Then Grant joined us. He would not look directly at me. Vivian began talking about transitions, about families taking different paths, about how sometimes letting go was the kindest act. Then she held out a silver envelope. "For Erin," she said, "a chance to begin the life that suits her best." I opened it. The settlement agreement. Same header, same signature pages. Grant had already signed. There was a strange clarity in realizing that the person you love has crossed a line so completely that you no longer have to argue with yourself about what it means. I looked at him. "You knew?" His face tightened. "Erin, let's not do this here." I almost admired the nerve they had created here. Vivian leaned toward the microphone. "Grant needs a wife who can stand beside the Caldwell name," she said. "Not someone who intends to hide behind a uniform forever." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone near the front actually coughed. Vivian mistook discomfort for agreement. She continued, "We've tried to help Erin find a more appropriate direction." That was when I understood something. She genuinely believed this room belonged to her. The stage, the donors, the story, even me. I reached into my pocket and took out a black pen. Grant finally looked alarmed. "What are you doing?" "Reading." I flipped to the acknowledgement page and signed where required. The ballroom went completely quiet. Vivian's smile changed first, not disappeared. Changed, because she had expected resistance. Tears, maybe begging, something she could manage. I handed the papers back. You finally gave me something I stopped being afraid to lose. Grant stared at me. Vivian opened her mouth, but before she could answer, a voice came from the side of the stage. Mrs. Caldwell, we actually need Staff Sergeant Brooks to remain up here. Colonel Marcus Reed was walking toward us. Behind him was First Sergeant Morales, and Lena was carrying a framed citation. I looked at her. She gave me the smallest nod. My knees almost went weak. Colonel Reed took the microphone. For those of you who don't know Staff Sergeant Brooks, you should. The screen behind us changed. A photograph appeared of military vehicles moving through smoke during the wildfire response. Colonel Reed explained how our logistics movement had nearly collapsed after road closures and conflicting orders, and how one NCO rebuilt the plan, coordinated drivers, redirected critical equipment, and kept medical support generators moving when timing mattered. Then he said my name. Applause started somewhere near the military tables. I could hear Vivian breathing beside me. Colonel Reed handed me the Regional Military Logistics Leadership Citation. Some people see boxes and trucks, he said. The Army sees the person who keeps hundreds of lives moving when everything else goes wrong. That was when First Sergeant Morales stepped forward. She handed me a sealed packet. Congratulations, Brooks. I opened it. Promotion selection. New assignment. Brigade Logistics NCO. Joint Base Lewis McCord. For a second, I forgot Vivian was even standing there. I looked at Lena. You knew? She smiled. I told you not to make plans. The applause grew louder. Grant's face had gone pale. Brittany was no longer filming. Her phone hung at her side. Vivian looked toward the donors, then the officers, then the giant foundation slogan behind us, as if searching for one person willing to rescue her from what she had created. Nobody moved. I turned toward her. My voice was calm. You spent years telling me this uniform made me smaller. I glanced around the ballroom. Tonight you invited the people who know exactly what it means. I did not insult her. I did not mention the job lists or the Sunday brunches or every time Grant had asked me to shrink so his mother would feel comfortable. I did not need to. For the first time, the truth had a microphone, and Vivian Caldwell had nothing left to say. The strange thing about public humiliation is that once it is recorded, it stops belonging to the people who planned it. By Monday morning, the Caldwell Veterans Leadership Gala had become something Vivian could no longer control with a phone call or a carefully worded statement. The hotel's audiovisual team had recorded the entire program because the foundation used clips from the gala for donor outreach. That meant there was clean footage of Vivian standing beneath a banner about honoring service while telling an active duty staff sergeant that her uniform made her unsuitable for the family. There was footage of Grant standing beside her. There was footage of me signing the papers without raising my voice. And there was footage of Colonel Reed walking onto that same stage minutes later and explaining exactly what I had done during the wildfire response. I never posted any of it. I didn't have to. One of the foundation board members called Grant's father, Harold Caldwell, before breakfast the next morning. By lunchtime, 2 major corporate sponsors had requested an explanation. One of them had a long-standing military hiring program and made it very clear they did not appreciate their logo appearing behind what one executive called a family ambush at a veterans event. Vivian's first instinct was to blame me. Of course it was. She left 3 voicemails. The first said I had misrepresented a private family matter. The second said I had damaged the foundation. The third was shorter. You knew that award was happening. That one almost made me laugh, as if my competence had somehow been unfair to her. I forwarded everything to my attorney and stopped listening after that. The divorce itself became uglier before it became simpler. Grant's attorney initially tried to describe me as rigid, career-obsessed, and emotionally unstable. According to the filing, my military schedule had made the marriage increasingly volatile. Then discovery started. That word sounds boring until somebody realizes every message they thought was private now has to be handed over. Grant had texted Vivian weeks before the gala. If she loses it in front of her command, everyone will finally understand why this has to end. I read that sentence twice in my attorney's office, not because I didn't understand it, because I finally did. For months, I had told myself Grant was weak, that he had been raised by a controlling mother, that he was afraid of losing his inheritance, that maybe he had gone along with things because he didn't know how to stand up to her. That text killed the last version of the marriage I was still protecting in my head. He had not been trapped between us. He had chosen a side. Worse, he had hoped I would break publicly enough to make his choice look reasonable. My attorney slid a legal pad toward me. You okay? I stared at the text. No. Then I took a breath. But I think I'm done being confused. That mattered more than feeling okay. A week later, Harold Caldwell asked to meet me at a diner off Academy Boulevard. Not one of the family hotels. Not the country club. Just an old place with cracked red booths, bad coffee, and a waitress who called everybody honey. He looked older without Vivian beside him. For most of my marriage, Harold had been polite in the way people are polite when they want credit for not participating in cruelty. He never insulted me. He never stopped it either. I should have said something years ago, he told me. I stirred my coffee. Yes, he looked down. I thought staying out of it was staying neutral. It wasn't. He nodded. That was the first honest thing I had ever heard from a Caldwell about silence. He told me the foundation board had asked Vivian to step away temporarily while they reviewed how the gala had been used. Brittany had deleted several posts after sponsors began asking questions. Grant had been removed from 2 upcoming donor meetings because the board did not want the family dispute attached to the foundation's Veterans Initiative. Harold sounded ashamed. I did not feel victorious. That surprised me. For years I had imagined what it would feel like if one of them finally admitted I had been treated badly. Turns out late respect does not travel backward in time and protect the person who needed it. Before we left, Harold said, I hope one day you can forgive us. I put cash under my coffee cup. Respect that arrives after the damage is still late. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was finally telling the truth without softening it for somebody else. Grant moved through every emotion except accountability. First, he was angry. You embarrassed my mother, then defensive. You know how she is, then scared. Can you tell your attorney to stop pulling foundation records? Finally, he became sentimental. He sent an old photo from our first trip to Estes Park. In it, we were standing beside a frozen lake, both of us sunburned and smiling like we had figured life out. Underneath it, he wrote, We were good once. We can get back there. For 10 minutes I stared at that picture. I missed the woman in it, not because she had Grant, because she still believed love automatically made people brave. I answered one message. We were good when I was willing to disappear inside your life. I'm not doing that anymore, he called immediately. I declined it. For the first time, I understood that leaving the marriage was not proof I had failed to save it. It was proof I had finally stopped abandoning myself just to keep everyone else comfortable. And once I saw it that way, there was nothing left to negotiate. A year later, I was standing outside a logistics office at Joint Base Lewis McChord, watching a line of Army trucks roll through the morning fog when I realized something strange. I had gone almost an entire week without thinking about Vivian Caldwell. Not because I had forgiven everything. Not because what happened no longer mattered. It just wasn't running my life anymore. That surprised me more than the promotion ever had. I was still in the Army, still logistics, still the woman who cared whether a vehicle was fueled, whether equipment arrived where it was supposed to, whether the young soldier, signing a hand receipt, actually understood what he was responsible for. The difference was that now I supervised a much larger operation, and nobody introduced me like my work needed an apology. My apartment was 20 minutes from base. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, gray carpet, a balcony that looked toward a line of evergreens, and a kitchen small enough that opening the dishwasher blocked one cabinet. I loved it. The first night I moved in, I ate grocery store rotisserie chicken straight out of the container because I had not unpacked my plates yet. At some point I realized the apartment was completely silent. For years, silence at home had meant somebody was angry. Grant refusing to speak, Vivian waiting to make a point, me wondering what I had done wrong. That night, silence meant nobody needed anything from me. I sat on the floor and cried for about 5 minutes. Then I laughed because I was crying over cheap chicken and an empty apartment. Healing is not always cinematic. Sometimes it looks ridiculous. First Sergeant Morales retired that spring. Before she left, she handed me her old challenge coin. "Don't get sentimental," she said. "I wasn't planning to. You're already making that face." Months later, I carried that coin into a leadership session for junior NCOs. Most of the soldiers in the room were in their 20s. Some looked confident. A few had that expression I recognized immediately. The one people wear when they are competent at work, but go home to someone who keeps convincing them they are not enough. I told them about pressure, not my divorce. I told them how easy it is to let people outside the gate define work they have never had to do. Then I put Morales's coin on the podium. "For a long time," I said, "I thought strength meant proving how much I could tolerate." The room got quiet. I was wrong. I told them there is no medal for staying in a place that requires you to become smaller just so somebody else can feel important. Duty matters. Loyalty matters. Commitment matters. But none of those things mean surrendering your self-respect. A young female sergeant came up afterward. Her name was Parker. She waited until almost everyone else had left. "Can I ask you something, Mom?" "Sure." She looked at the floor. "What if the people you love never understand what you're worth?" For 1 second, I saw myself at that hotel gala, then in Grant's car on I-25, then sitting beside Morales after the wildfire, holding Vivian's ridiculous list of appropriate careers. I looked at Parker. "Then make sure you do." She nodded like she was trying not to cry. So was I. A month later, a letter from Grant showed up in my mailbox. Actual paper, actual stamp. He wrote that he had started therapy. He had stepped away from the foundation. He said he finally understood how often he had chosen comfort over courage. At the bottom he wrote, "I don't expect you to answer. I just needed to say I'm sorry without asking you to fix anything." I read it once. Then I put it in a drawer. I did not respond. That was not revenge. For the first time, Grant had taken responsibility without demanding emotional labor from me. I could respect that without reopening the door. Some doors close because something failed. Others close because you finally learned where you no longer belong. The next morning, I drove on to base before sunrise. Helicopters were already moving in the distance. Diesel engines started across the motor pool. Soldiers were checking vehicles, calling out numbers, complaining about coffee, doing the ordinary work that keeps an army moving. Years earlier, Vivian had looked at that world and seen something small. I looked at it now and saw my life. Not the life the Caldwells approved of. Not the life Grant wanted me to make easier for him. Mine. And that turned out to be enough. Erin's story reminds us of something many people do not learn until much later in life. Your worth does not decrease simply because someone refuses to recognize it. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not caused by strangers, but by the people whose love we trusted enough to believe. When criticism, silence, manipulation, or disrespect becomes part of everyday life, it is easy to start questioning yourself and calling that doubt reality. But staying quiet is not always the same as keeping the peace, and loyalty should never require you to disappear. As the old saying goes, actions speak louder than words. Erin did not prove herself by screaming louder than the people who looked down on her. She kept doing the work, trusted the skills she had earned, and eventually stopped handing other people the authority to decide who she was. That may be the most important lesson here. Justice does not always mean watching someone else lose. Sometimes justice is simply reaching a place where their opinion no longer controls your choices, your confidence, or your future. We cannot always change people who are determined to misunderstand us, but we can decide how much access their judgment has to our lives. And sometimes walking away is not giving up. It is finally choosing yourself. If this story made you think about someone you know, or perhaps a chapter of your own life, share your thoughts in the comments. I would truly like to hear what lesson stayed with you most. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video a like and subscribe so you do not miss more dramatic, meaningful stories about dignity, courage, and second chances. Wherever life finds you today, I hope the road ahead brings you quieter mornings, kinder people, and the peace of knowing you never have to become smaller just to belong.